All right, hello everyone. Welcome everyone, councillors, officers and members of the public to Development Control Committee A today. We'll do a round of introductions and I'm going to, if possible, include the officers in that. So just obviously say your role here, maybe your ward as well. So I'm Councillor Rob Breyer, I'm Councillor for St George West and I'm the chair of the committee. Should we go like this?
Hi everyone, I'm Steve Gregory and I'm clerk in the DCA committee today.
Councillor Ellie Freeman, Bedminster.
Councillor Calashoni, George, Clifton Down.
Councillor Serena Ralston, also Clifton Down.
Councillor Sarah Classic, Hengrove and Whitchurch Park.
Councillor Al-Sayed Rabi from Vale.
Councillor Zoe Peat from the Avonmouth and Lawrence Western Ward.
Councillor Katja Hörnchen from Brislington East.
Conrad Wodseye, Principal Planning Officer.
Jonathan Diamond from Development Management.
And just for the record, I don't know whether you've got a microphone over there, but Pip Howson, Group Manager for Transport and Development, is over here. Thanks, everyone. We will try to go through business as is appropriate in a timely manner. I should say, in terms of safety information, there's no scheduled fire alarm test. So if you hear anything, it is real. The chair and the clerk, that's myself and Steve here, follow us out the main door and meet between the cathedral and the library if there is a fire alarm, but we don't expect that to happen. Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is apologies for absence and substitutions. I don't think we have any, so that's a quick agenda item. Agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. So this is to note any interest relevant to the consideration of items on the agenda. Has anyone got a declaration of interest?
Chairman, it's not technically a declaration of interest, but just in the interests of transparency. The applicant for the first application did a number of schemes in my patch, though I'm coming to this completely unaffected.
Thank you, Richard. Zoe, yeah.
Likewise, just in the interest of transparency, obviously the works that have been proposed are within my ward, but I also have not made up my mind.
Thank you. Thanks. That's helpful, Zoe. Any others?
Just to add to it all. I'm obviously Bedminster and the Ruby Street application is in my ward. Again, I've not had any conversations with anybody about it before this meeting.
Thank you. Very helpful. Any others? Thanks very much. Okay. So minutes of the previous meeting. Now, I should admit that I was not at the previous meeting. I was not able to be there. But Councillor Katja Hörnchen was there to chair. So could you just formally...
I will confirm that the minutes are as... What's the right word? They're all right, like what it says on the tin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seconded.
And seconded by Richard. So that's great. Can we agree that those have the correct record of the meeting? Are we all okay with that? All those in favour? Aye. Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Brilliant. And agenda item 5 is the action sheet. And there is one item on the action sheet, I think, which is to bring an enforcement report. And that has happened for this meeting, so we'll get into that in a second. I don't think there are any other outstanding actions at this point. So we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is appeals. This is to note appeals lodged, imminent public inquiries and appeals awaiting decision. Is there anything that anyone on the committee would like to raise about the appeals at this point that were mentioned? Yeah.
I've got a feeling Jonathan may wish to address an item.
Sorry, say that again?
I believe Jonathan wants to address a matter I raised last month.
Oh, okay. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, it was really just a general comment, really, to follow up on a question that was asked at the meeting last month, really. And it's really just a general comment around the appeals report. Is just to say that, again, in terms of the number that have been dismissed versus allowed, we have noted that the percentage of appeals allowed against refusals of planning permission is still higher really than where we would like it to be. This is something that is of concern to us, and as I said last month, we are undertaking some work, some analysis, just to look at trends, themes, and we'd be happy to share those kind of with members, perhaps through a Leeds meeting in the future, for example. But it's something that we do need to keep an eye on, we do need to reflect on, and just identify where inspectors aren't agreeing with us on kind of certain issues, just to kind of reflect on the recommendations and also the decisions that we're taking, and just kind of feedback, on that. So that is ongoing, but I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan. Anyone got anything else they'd like to add or ask about the appeals item here? I think that would be really good to bring it back to a Leeds meeting and talk through, some of the figures and how it's got to, because I did notice that a little bit myself this time reading through. Okay, so let's move on to agenda item 7, which is about enforcement, and it's to note recent enforcement notices. And also we have been given, thank you very much, a enforcement report, which may be an item of discussion here. Does any committee member have anything they'd like to raise around enforcement at this point? Yeah, Councillor Alston.
I'm not sure this is the right forum for it, but maybe we could have a wider presentation, a bit more detail about this, because I'm slightly curious about some of the figures. In particular, the very low number of notices served, which is 2 in that period. It may be that period isn't representative, but as someone who is in a ward with a fair number of listed buildings and some unconsented work going on at the moment, that doesn't seem to be much of a deterrent. So, in terms against the number of cases that were closed, I just wonder if you had a brief comment on that, or if we could have a presentation in future.
Yes, we would certainly be happy to provide that to members. Again, this is something that we have been working on in terms of the number of notices that have been served. We've recently brought in some additional resource into that team, so there's an extra graduate planner, and we've also made some kind of organisational changes as well, which have resulted in kind of clearing the backlog really on some of the older enforcement cases. We do actually have 4 notices that are currently with legal that unfortunately didn't quite make the papers, but hopefully will appear next month, that relate to unauthorised HMO use. We'd certainly be happy sort of just to provide a more sort of broader update.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Longer-standing members of this committee certainly share Serena's concerns, though the chief planners and her team have had plans for some time to bring resources, and as Jonathan said, that has happened over this summer, so hopefully we'll see, should we say, more challenging figures.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, and just to say, I think for me, the sort of thinking, an understanding of that intervention threshold, which is obviously the crucial aspect of this, is when the local planning authority takes enforcement action and whether they understand it not to be necessary is, or not to be necessary, but not to be in the public interest, is of immediate concern for a lot of people, obviously, because they will have extant permissions in their wards that perhaps they feel should be enforced upon and maybe haven't been. So it would be really useful, to just, bring that back to whatever the correct forum is, probably either Leeds or maybe we would have a wider conversation about it at some point. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else on that item before we move on? No? Okay, so let us move on to agenda item 8, which is public forum, which will be part of agenda item 9 to start with. For those in the public gallery, just to let you know, we take the public forum at the moment where the application it relates to is to be heard. So the first application we'll be hearing is agenda item 9A, 22/06075/F, Giant Goram, Barrowmead Drive, Bristol. So we'll take the public forum for that to begin with. Thank you to everyone who submitted public statements. It's really important as part of this committee that we hear from people who are affected by planning issues. And I would like to start by taking us through the questions that have been submitted. The questions have received answers which hopefully you will have had sight of now. So the role of the person who is asking the question is not to re-ask that question, but to ask any supplementary questions to those answers, if you understand what I'm saying. You get one question for one supplementary question if you've asked one question, two if you've asked two, and two if you've asked three, if you see what I mean. So let's start with question 1, which was submitted by, I think, Roger Sabido, is that the correct pronunciation? And please, could you ask any supplementary questions? Let me just find it. Oh, here. That's the first bit.
Sorry, where are you? That's the answer there, isn't it?
Yeah. No, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Sorry. So you asked the first question. You've asked 3 in total. So you have 2 supplementary questions. So if you'd like to ask your first supplementary question, Roger Sabido, go for it.
Yes, I would like to know to what degree the planning officers actually investigated the situation over enforcement. The security of the site has been casual and tokenistic and has enraged neighbours. And I would like to know basically why enforcement hasn't been pursued there.
Thanks. Who can...
Thank you. So, looking into the details of this one, we've noted that there isn't an enforcement case on file. There is a case regarding safety of the building in terms of building regulations. However, we cannot discuss the actual details of that. It remains confidential on both cases, but like I say, there is an active enforcement case. What I would say is that we acknowledge the condition of the building. We acknowledge that there's been a level of deterioration with the building since 2019. We understand that the building is vulnerable to vandalism, and it's been secured with Harris fencing. I believe that the owner is working with the local police to ensure that it's secure. But what I would say is that in terms of the condition and condition of the building, it's not essentially a material factor for the determination of this planning application. Thank you.
Okay, would you like to ask one further supplementary question?
Well, I'd like to follow that up. Has that been pursued with the police, for instance, who have attended frequently? As I said, the security fencing is completely tokenistic. There has been, in fact, damage has been encouraged to the building, and then when you look at the officer's report, you find that the condition of the building seems to be a significant part. The Lawrence Western Community Pub CBS actually had a survey professionally executed on the building some 2 years ago, and that found it to be quite sound. Now, if that isn't the case now, that is due to the direct neglect by the owners and the refusal to secure the building.
Is there a direct question? What's the direct question you'd like to ask on this?
Do you not agree that the owners have not? Do you not agree the owners have contributed to the state and that it shouldn't form part of the officer's report?
In terms of the owners, essentially you're suggesting negligence in terms of the protection and security of the building. We haven't got evidence to suggest that. Obviously, there's been cases of vandalism, and it has. We agree that there's been deterioration. As far as we're aware, the owners have done their part in trying to secure it with fencing and work with the police. That's as far as we know. But as we say, we haven't got an enforcement file open on it in terms of deliberate neglect on the building from the owners.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. We're going to move on to question 2 from John Mackenzie. Would you like to ask any supplementary questions to this one? You have 2 supplementary questions if you desire.
Mary Page, speaking on behalf of John Mackenzie. His first question reference is how many reports have BCC received regarding the property. The answer only refers to that there are no current planning enforcement investigations open relating to this site. I believe his question was about, are there any reports, i.e., is there a bat survey, is there any form of other survey, and is there any report whatsoever? So the answer is incomplete. Could we please have a revised answer as to whether or not there are any reports relating to this property?
In terms of a bat survey, yes, there is a bat survey that relates to the property. I mean, that obviously indicates that there is some damage to the roof, and potentially the property could be a nesting place for bats. However, there isn't any evidence to suggest so. So I can say that there's been a recent bat survey that talks somewhat about the condition. However, I don't know if that answers the question directly.
Well, it's what other reports. I just use that as one example of a report that could be given. And therefore would like the answer to be complete, that's all.
Yeah, in terms of other reports, sorry to interrupt, in terms of other reports submitted, there is the viability report that was submitted by the applicant that gives some indication of the condition. So that was submitted at the time of the application, and there's some photographic evidence in there and some explanation of the condition that was produced by Savills on behalf of the applicant. So we've got an indication that the pub is in a poor state.
Did that report include...
Sorry, is this a second supplementary question? Or do you want to move on to the second supplementary question? Because you've asked the first one. So, sorry, I need to keep it formal.
It's a second supplementary.
Okay, fair enough, go ahead.
So did that report include the fact that the owners contracted contractors to remove part of the roof on the 15th of February 2024, and the police were called, and the police were satisfied that the contractors were properly employed by the owners in order to remove part of the roof, and that's maybe why there is a substantial deterioration to the property.
I missed the question.
Did the report? Did their own report include their admission, which should be in there, that they contributed to the downfall of the property? They removed the roof on the 15th of February 2024, and the police were called because it was thought to be vandalism by the local resident. The local residents thought that vandalism was occurring. The police established that the contractors who were removing the back section of the roof had been employed by the owners.
We don't have any evidence that relates to that's been submitted by the applicant. In terms of the viability stuff, most of that came in prior to that. However, we would say that we've got no evidence of neglect. And in terms of the decision, we would suggest that it wouldn't materially affect the decision that we've made on the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. We can move on to question 3, which is from Christopher Faulkner Gibson. Sorry, is Christopher Faulkner Gibson here? Thank you. So you've got, sorry, I've not checked this out. Christopher, you've got two supplementary questions if you wish.
Thank you, Chair. Before my first supplementary question, may I very quickly refer to my email to you of yesterday evening regarding the documents which appear to have been published between the 2nd and 9th of August, but only became visible to the public yesterday. These include a revised planning statement and what should have been a response to Camera's objection, but the link actually goes to the objection itself. We experienced an identical situation in January in relation to another application for a different pub, and that meeting was chaired by Councillor Eddy, so he will be familiar with this. A key document was not publicly available until the day before the committee, despite a much earlier publication date being shown. Consequently, we have had no opportunity to scrutinise or respond to these documents, but the case officer has. I don't know if the committee have seen them, but we have not. Will you, Chair, please ask the case officer to explain why these documents were kept hidden from us?
Okay, so in terms of revised documents, obviously we've had a recent revised BAT survey that's come in recently. I believe there was an upload on Monday. That's been included in the updating and included in the plans in the updating sheet. There's also that response to the objection from Camera, I think that you just referred to, that we also uploaded on Monday. That's come from the applicant, and I think the comments have been uploaded also from the ecologist, also based on the moving changes with the updating on the BAT survey.
Right, I'm not asking about the BAT survey. I'm asking about the revised planning statement, which was not available for public view until yesterday, and what should have been the response to the Camera objection. The link actually went to the Camera objection itself, and that was still the case this morning. So we have not had an opportunity to view those documents, and this is a repeat of a situation that arose back in January, and I'm asking for a clear response to this lapse. Because, Chair, I think it is a very significant matter that key documents have not been made publicly available when they should have been. This is the second time this year that it's happened, and we're quite angry about this.
Okay, I mean, yeah, do you want to just...
Yeah, so sorry, in reference to the revised planning statement and the Camera objection, so I believe the revised planning statement and the Camera objection response were made available on Monday. They are covered in the report, so the report that was...
okay. Okay. Let's just wait for the answer and then we'll come back for you second supplementary, okay?
Yeah, so they are covered in the actual report, the first copy and the amendments, so that actually covers the content of those documents. We are referring to them when making the consideration, but yeah, they were not uploaded until Monday this week, and there's been a lot of plans coming through on this one, lots of updates, so we obviously some things have come through a little late, but they came in on Monday. In terms of the question about the link to the response to the Camera objection, I'm not aware of that, so I can take a look at what link comes up, but it is referenced in the report, the content of that response. Okay,
I think you've made that point. We can't obviously change that right now, even if we take your comments on board. I think you should just maybe focus on the next question. So, have you got another supplementary question?
Well, yeah, I've actually got two supplementary questions. That
was your first, and you've got one more.
Well, it wasn't really, Chair. Come on.
No, you asked a question, the answer was given. So there's one more supplementary question.
Right. In response to question 3, along with statements made in the officer's report, show that the case officer believes the provision of a micropub meets the DM6 requirement for alternative provision. Given that the actual criterion is for a diverse range of public house provision to meet the collective needs and expectations of the whole community, can the case officer explain how he believes a tiny micropub operation that cannot cater for families can achieve this when the local community groups are very clear that it cannot?
Okay, so in terms of policies BCS 12 and DM6 and the emerging policy SSE 8, we would consider an alternative provision, and now obviously we're replacing a pub with a micropub. However, it is considered to be a public house. It will be reduced in size and level of facilities provided, but we've considered that in the current economic climate, it may only be the only realistic viable alternative, but it would be conditioned to operate as a pub, so it is considered a direct reprovision on site of the lost pub. That's what we conclude on that matter.
Okay, thank you for your questions. We will now move on to statements for this item. First statement is from Adam Kowalski, or I think maybe someone else may be speaking on Adam Kowalski's behalf. Yeah, okay.
Hi committee, I'm just here on behalf of Adam who couldn't make it today. Adam lives a few doors down from the pub, literally a few doors down, with a family, and he feels very strongly about the importance of community cohesion and how a local pub can contribute to that. He's also very unhappy about the idea that we're rewarding the developer for neglecting the site, and the fact that this is the last pub of 5 pubs in Lawrence Weston, all of which have been lost to development. So Adam's also cited some cases under the Localism Act, saying that they show that not enough attention has been paid to the asset of community value status of the giant Goram. He also agrees that the scale and nature of a micropub can't match the capacity, atmosphere and historical value of the existing pub, and refers you to actually paragraph 97A of the NPPF, promoting social well-being and maintaining community facilities as being the function of a public house. That's not something that a micropub can achieve.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for that. So I should have said at the beginning, we're going to try to keep to 1 minute for each statement, if that's okay, because we've got a lot to get through. Thank you for that. Statement number 2 is John Mackenzie, and I believe Mary Page is speaking.
John also lives in very close proximity to the giant Goram, and he agrees that the site is an eyesore and it's disgraceful that this building has been left by the owners to deteriorate. And he knows that lots of his neighbours are pushed to the point of desperation that, almost anything needs to be done to improve it. But it's felt that the decision to demolish the site has been made when he witnessed this incident, as I say, with the copper roof being removed on the 15th of February, and that they were contractors undertaking work for the owners, and so therefore he feels they've contributed to the site's downfall. He can see very little change to the revised plans for the proposed development, and the micropub just doesn't really cut it because the other plans were refused. It would struggle to accommodate the occupants of the proposed 8 new residences there, let alone any additional residents from the surrounding neighbourhood. And it's a shame that the developer appears not to have engaged with local residents and community planning groups to help better understand the needs of the deprived and isolated area for them.
Okay, thanks very much for that statement. Statement number 3 is from Les Cooper. If Les Cooper is here, I think maybe not. Is Les Cooper here? No. Is that not? Okay. Statement 4 is from Lucy O'Brien. Is Lucy here? Statement number 5 is from Ian Stevens. Is Ian Stevens here? No. Statement number 6 is from Christopher Faulkner Gibson. So 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. CAMRA has supported planning and licensing applications for many micropubs, both locally and nationally. In the right place, they usefully supplement existing provision of pubs, cafes and bars as part of a local mix. However, as CAMRA knows from experience, the model is less successful when it is the only option, a view supported by former local ward councillor Joe Sargent, whose statement you will have read. The community group capable of funding and building one of the tallest wind turbines in the country is more than capable of restoring and running a local pub and has developed a viable business plan to do so. This application fails the tests of planning policy DM6 and is not wanted by the local community. Key aspects of it have already been tested at appeal and rejected. We do not accept that a micropub is a sufficiently substantive amendment to justify approval, and we urge the committee to reject it. CAMRA stands ready to join the local community in successfully defending any appeal again. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The next statement is statement 7, Paul Jobson. Is Paul here?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, councillors. Councillors may be aware of previous planning application for residential development of the site, which was refused and dismissed at appeal. This application before you has sought to address those issues and is materially different from that application, and obviously now has a recommendation for approval by your officers. The site remains vacant and continues to be a subject of vandalism and antisocial behaviour. The applicant would like to address misleading statements from objectors which suggest that they have deliberately damaged and vandalised the property, including continued suggestions of contractors being appointed. This is categorically not true, and my client would like to for councillors to disregard such comments. The matter is actually with the police, and the people responsible are being charged. The applicants have welcomed officers' attempts to broker a solution for the redevelopment of the site by the provision of a micro pub as part of a mixed-use scheme. We believe...
Okay, thanks for your statement. Sorry, that's 1 minute.
Well,
sorry about that. Next one is statement 8, Nick Bracey.
My name's Nick Bracey. I own the plough at Charfield, and it was very much a similar sort of situation where it was a derelict pub, and we took it on some 5 years ago. We've now made it into a micropub and put 4 cottages and 2 apartments. And again, we received lots of objections when we put our planning permission in, but of late, all those objectors have now come up and shook my hand and said the micropub actually works. And off the back of that, we're actually building another micropub in Lloyd Green, and we are supported by CAMRA as well.
Thank you for that brief statement. Statement number 9 is Nigel Morris. Is Nigel here? Over the side.
If the application is approved, the community will be losing its only pub, which is a valuable asset and which will not be satisfied by a micro pub. The developers bought the pub hoping to profit by converting it into housing. To achieve this, they deliberately allowed the property to become deteriorated and should not be rewarded by planning permission being granted, as this sets a precedent for others to do the same thing in other cases. The owners cannot say that it is unviable because they have not run it as a pub, and this has not been independently verified. The case officer's report is incorrect and should not be used, as it appears to be complicit to the developer's needs. It ignores CAMRA's comments, incorrectly states that the Lawrence Western Planning Forum raised no objection, and also incorrectly states a reasonable walking distance is 1,200 metres, ignoring the practice road guidance, which clearly states 800 metres, which discriminates against those with mobility issues. I urge the committee to reject this application.
Thank you for your statement. Statement number 10 is Norman Spalding. Is Norman here to speak? Yep.
Okay. I'll summarise as time is short. Concerning the viability of full-sized pubs versus micro-pubs, the case officer's report quotes a local builder who may have a direct financial interest in this application, but it does not explain what sources have been used to check or verify his opinions. The same report makes very little reference to the very detailed submissions made by CAMRA and the formally recognised community groups. Full-sized pubs can be used for communal events such as weddings and funerals. Clubs and societies can meet there. They can be a focus for casual socialising and major public events. Micropubs typically operate restricted hours because of their close proximity to residents and possible nuisance. They have little or no outside space and limited or no food offering. They are typically one-man operations and offer few or no employment opportunities to others. Community ownership has been used to revive over 100 full-sized pubs around the UK, and to date, none has failed.
Thank you very much for your statement. Statement number 11 is Roger Sabido. Would you like to speak to your statement?
Our Lawrence Western estate is recognised as deprived with a scarcity of social amenity. 12 years ago, we set up the Neighbourhood Planning Forum and a Regeneration Trust to reverse these trends. Our Neighbourhood Development Plan, made in 2017, has actively brought a 15% increase in the number of homes in the last 7 years. Now we need the social recreational facilities to change LW's housing warehouse transit camp image. This, the last pub in Lawrence Western, the last good opportunity to provide the informal social amenities needed to tackle isolation, foster mutual support, young families, the infirm, the elderly, a sustainable community. Not just a boozer, but the Plunkett Foundation's more than a pub model, proven on estates across the country. Our Plunkett-supported resident-led community benefit society can use its community, but with the business advice, training and support, building and local economy. We need the giant Goram to build our sustainable community, not the dwarf before us. Let's ensure that developments are suitable and match the needs of their neighbourhood.
Thank you.
Please stand by the original 2020 planning decision, decisively upheld at appeal. Support the NDP and your residents and refuse this application.
Thank you. Thank you for your statement. Statement 12 is Joe Sargent. Is Joe here?
A micro pub. I've been to the Plough at Charfield, and I have to say it's a very fine establishment. I'd love to have an establishment like that, but the problem is it has a lot of outside space with heating and shelters, and you can actually probably triple, quadruple the number of people that can use that pub. You don't have that here in Lawrence Western, and as everyone else has commented before, the micro pub is not going to be a viable option. So it's going to fail. And that means then we're back to square one. And in 2020, the planning inspector said we needed to keep the giant Goram as it was an important community amenity. So don't reward a bad decision, but a bad business decision. You don't have to. There's plenty in the planning, in our planning legislation to back up a decision to say no to this application. Don't reward their wanton neglect of the site and their alleged asset stripping. And if it's a blight on the community, it's because they've made it so.
Thank you for your statement. Statement 13 is Amy Smith, who I don't think is here. And statement 14 is Mary Page.
Likewise, I thought the Plough at Charfield was gorgeous. It's in sort of the leafy edge of Gloucestershire countryside there. And it's got a fully sort of integrated heating system with radiators and a wood-burning stove in order to heat the outside space, where there are around 80 seats. There's also awnings that are worthy of a chalet down at Farnborough Air Show, where you can put the awning across or not to keep you dry in the rain in this country. The micro pub will not cut it as a heart of this community. Having been there, having seen the levels of deprivation and yet the levels of hope and aspiration and ambition in Lawrence Western, this community needs to be supported, and it needs something that won't be turned into just another flatlet, because if you look at the plans and how it's laid out, you can quite easily see how the micro pub could be converted into just another property. There is no outside space. Please refuse this application. 16 seats and 16 pints a night will not cut it.
Thank you for your statement. That does conclude public forum. I do appreciate, and I should have said that probably at the beginning, how difficult it is to get everything you want to say within 1 minute. I realise that is frustrating at times, but as you'll understand, we do have to get through the business of the meeting, which is obviously deciding, having the discussion, having the informed discussion, and then making the decision. So thank you everyone for coming and representing your views at public forum. We'll move on to the officer report and recommendation for this application. So over to you, Conrad.
Thank you, Chair. So the proposal's at the Giant Goram, and the proposal is for the demolition of the existing public house and the erection of a mixed-use scheme providing 8 residential dwellings and a micropub. The reason for the committee referral is to date there's been a total of 28 objections received and 8 letters of support. Only 6 have been received in terms of objections since the revision of the scheme to a micropub. The main concerns raised include the loss of the pub, the Giant Goram being the last community pub in the area, being a much needed community hub rather. The suggestions that community-oriented enterprise should run the pub, and there's been concerns about the proposed housing, suggestions that the provision of 8 homes will not improve the community. There's no provision of housing in the area. There's been concerns raised about the proposal of a micropub being a niche proposal, unlikely to be successful or serve the community long term. There's been concern about the lack of community facilities in the area, also the lack of community engagement. I draw members' attention to the updating and the concerns raised about us not considering the Lawrence Western planning form objection. I do confirm that that was considered in the report. It was a typo. It's being covered in the updating. We've included the summary of the objection, and it was part of the material consideration of the application. And generally, in terms of community engagement, there's been concerns that the area is being served badly for community facilities, with concerns over owners and developers not engaging with the community to understand the needs. There's been concerns raised about viability, suggestions that the pub has been deliberately run down to make it inviable, also that the pub's been marketed at an unrealistic price. Suggestions of other facilities provided, such as a local shop. We've got the objection from Camera that's being discussed in the statements, but the micropub does not meet the needs of a community for a full-size pub. It doesn't meet the test of DM6 in terms of alternative provision. And it suggests that a pub could be viable on site with community support for this. So here's the site location, fronting Barrowmead Drive on the corner of Middleton Road in Lawrence Western. Here's the site layout of the existing premises. You've got the existing east and south elevations rather, the south being the primary elevation. You can see a picture of the pub there. There's some open fencing, but there's some boarding up of the premises. It's been closed since 2019. You can see some pictures of the site overall. There's some broken windows there on the rear elevation, just to give you an idea of the condition. Internally, you've got the lounge bar, the sports bar, and the accommodation upstairs. There's some images provided of the condition of the roof internally. That was submitted with the viability report there. So here we've got the proposed site plan. We've got parking serving the dwellings and landscaping, and there's the site layout. So we've got the proposed ground floor plan, 8 dwellings and a micropub. You've got a mixture of 6 3-bed units and 2 2-bed units. It's the proposed first floor plan and the roof plan, and the front elevation and the rear elevation of the proposed dwellings and the micropub. And we've got a 3D view from Barrowmead Drive of what we envisage the development to look like when complete. And then another one on the corner of Middleton Road. And we've got the east and west elevations proposed. So in terms of plan and balance, we acknowledge there's negative impacts from the proposal. It'll be a loss of a public house, the last in the area. The loss of the existing building, which we consider a non-designated heritage asset. It's a rare example. There's also conflict with the Lawrence Western Neighbourhood Development Plan in terms of policy CSF1, which requires that local facilities should be retained unless they are replaced with services or facilities of an equal or higher value to the community. However, officers consider that material considerations weigh in favour of the proposal. The pub's been vacant since 2019. It didn't appear very successful. Viable proposals to bring the building back into use do appear unlikely. The existing building is in poor condition. It would require extensive renovation to bring it to use, and currently is at risk of further vandalism. We believe that the policy complies with BCS 12, DM6, and the emerging policy SSC 8 in provision of a micropub on site. While it cannot be fully satisfied that a pub was not economically viable in terms of the evidence provided, the proposal is considered an alternative provision of the giant Goram. Although it will be reduced in size, the level of facilities provided in the current economic climate may be the only realistic viable alternative. We'd benefit from 8 new dwellings on site, on a long-term vacant site, with the direct provision of a micropub. We've got some positive gains in B&G, including tree planting on site. We've got sustainable development, which the proposal exceeds the policy requirement of 20% reduction in CO2 emissions. Just to conclude then, we'd recommend approval with conditions. Thank you.
Thanks, Conrad. We now have time for some discussion and debate amongst the committee, and any questions particularly. Sorry, let's get this right. Debate comes slightly later. Let's talk through any questions that you have for the officers present, anything you want to raise at this point. I've got Richard and Al, and then I think we had Serena and George. I've got everyone. So let's just go Richard and Al to start with.
Conrad, my question is probably pretty rhetorical, really, but for transparency's sake, I'd like a reply. Am I correct in believing the role of this committee today is to judge on its merits this application we've received, not to actually judge whether another one may have been appropriate or we should have actually received another one for a different use?
Thank you. So the merits of this application must be judged by the committee today. In terms of alternative provision, we've considered the proposal, which essentially is considered an alternative provision. So that's the scheme that we're looking at. In terms of this proposal, it's considered that there is alternative provision provided on site with this direct proposal. So we are looking at discussing the scheme that's before us with the committee. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
You mentioned that a larger pub wouldn't be as financially viable. How did you come up to this conclusion? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of that conclusion, that's considered to be more of an observation, given the nature of this pub and the history. We've got some evidence in terms of the viability, and we understand that it's not conclusive. It hasn't been proven that the existing or previous pub wasn't viable, but we can consider that it hasn't clearly been successful. That's obvious given the time it's been vacant. But in terms of just general... Sorry?
But that wasn't actually down to the pub, right? That was more down to the property developers. Is that right or is that wrong?
In terms of the assessment of the viability. So that's been submitted by the applicant.
Okay.
And we've reviewed it. We haven't considered that that's conclusive in terms of being conclusive in terms of providing enough evidence to ensure that it's not viable. Okay. However, I think your question proceeds to ask why we think that a micropub would be viable.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
so in terms of that, we can see in terms of the economical climate, it's obvious that pubs are closing down at quite a significant rate. Yeah. Evidence we've seen points towards that micropubs are picking up and expanding. Clearly, they are, in terms of a business venture, less of a risk. They're run on a smaller scale. So they're probably more likely to be secure in future business terms. However, obviously, that's a kind of minor factor in determining this. What we've got here is a proposal for a micropub. We haven't had a concrete proposal for anything else.
Okay.
So we're considering this as an alternative in this debate.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, was there other hands up? Sorry, who's next? So we'll take Serena next.
Can I just ask, what is a micropub in planning terms? So how does it differ from a pub? Is it a different class, use class?
So in planning terms, a pub and also a micropub, they're in the same use class, which is sui generis. So in terms of the planning use, they are the same or equal to. They do have opportunities to change to a different use class under permit development rights. However, in the recommendation, we have recommended that the permit development rights have been removed in order to secure the micropub on site, and it would need an application to change that use.
Yeah, Ellie, and then yeah, go for it.
2 questions. I'm just looking through the documents now, and I know that there's been a lot of conversation about this. Have we got a clear summary of how the community was consulted about this application? Feels like we haven't got a statement that I would normally expect to see saying what has been done.
Thank you. So in terms of community consultation and engagement, the application is a minor application. It's not actually a statutory requirement for the applicant to actually engage directly with the community. So I would say that there hasn't been any evidence provided of such, but it's not a statutory requirement given the status of the application.
Okay, thank you. Very disappointing, but there we go. And you mentioned this is probably for later on in discussion, but we talk a lot about approving with conditions, and just want to be clear that, you know, make sure you do go through those conditions. I think it's important for the public to understand what conditions we'll be considering today.
Yeah, so if you want to bring the debate to that area of topic, then we're happy to discuss that before a recommendation is voted on.
Great. Zoe, yep, go for it. Oh, sorry, Katja was first, then Zoe, sorry.
Sorry. It says the property was originally listed as an ACV in June 2018, and then it was removed from the register in December 22. I'm not quite, and then it's the expiry of an 18-month protected moratorium period. Now, I'm not really understanding that statement. So how can it be put onto the register and then taken off? Why is that? Why does that happen? And who decides to take it off the register?
Yeah, so in terms of being an asset of community value, so I think it was at risk in 2018. It was put on the register. And I think there's a time period that it stays on there. It's not permanently on there. So it's put on the register. I think it could be something like 18 months. I'm not conclusive on that answer, but it offers the chance for the community to offer bids or ways to take on the premises. So it's open for that period of time, and then yeah, I think that
and then it lapses rather than taken off.
There's a time that it expires. I don't know if Jonathan can give me a bit more background on the nature of that, please.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure about that myself. And in terms of the relevance of the planning assessment, whilst that can be a material consideration, it would really be open to the LPA, to the committee, to really decide kind of what weight that should be given in the assessment of this application. It's ultimately planning policies that really sort of determine the acceptability of a particular use, but it can potentially be of relevance.
Yeah, because that doesn't really. So, did the community know that it wasn't a community a community? I'm going ACV.
Yeah, I believe that an offer was made from the Lawrence Western Community Pub CBS Limited, Save the Giant Goram, during prior to the expiry of the listed as a community of asset.
Yeah, this is it.
So they made an offer to take it on. In terms of the response to that, it was suggested that it was too low and proof of funds were not provided.
Proof of funds is more interesting to me rather than the 250,000 because obviously housing is more valued than pubs. So that's, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, Zoe, yeah.
Hi, so generally I'm always in favour of housing, but when I look at the proposed pictures, I suppose my big worry is the actual micropub. You can see it on the bottom floor on the right hand side, and my worry, I suppose, is if in the event the micropub was not profitable, how easy would it be to just then turn it into another flat?
Okay, so we've conditioned the use of it being a micropub, so any change outside of a micropub would require a fresh planning application and a fresh assessment, and obviously given that it's protected, we'd have to make those considerations. We've also conditioned that there's been a level of marketing undertaken following the completion of the residential buildings, and we've also conditioned that it's finished in a level to be used as a micropub. So we've done what we can in terms of ensuring that a micropub is actually implemented on site. However, if it's not, that would be subject to further planning. If, for example, like you suggest, they wanted to turn it into housing, that would be separate consideration, and we would consider that at this stage unacceptable given the protection of a pub on site with policies such as DM6.
So I suppose the thing is when you look at the outside of the proposed, it doesn't look like a pub or a micropub. It looks like a block of houses and flats. And whilst I'm not necessarily against the idea, I'm just worried if there is potentially an ulterior motive in the future.
I'm not sure that can be commented upon by a case officer. That is a subjective point of view, honestly. So I think it's a point worth raising. Thank you. I just want to ask one quick question, and I'll come to. I have seen the two hands. I'll come to you in a sec. About DM6 is just. I just want to read it out actually because I think it's important to have this just out there in this meeting and obviously on the webcast. Proposals involving the loss of established public houses will not be permitted unless it is demonstrated that 1, the public house is no longer economically viable, or 2, a diverse range of public house provision exists within the locality. So there's more than that in that slight bit, but those are the key 2 points. So it seems to me that on 2, it's been accepted that there's not a diverse range of public house provision in the locality. I think that's fairly uncontentious potentially. And on 1, the key question is whether the public house is no longer economically viable. Can you just talk us through again how someone proves that a public house is no longer economically viable when it comes to a planning committee and in a planning application of this nature? So how do they prove that the public house, or evidence at least, is no longer economically viable, and what evidence has been presented in regards of that?
Okay, so firstly, we would look at sort of financial accounts dating back from when it was run as a pub. In terms of this case, there's limited information that's been provided, so we can't accept that the accounts alone suggest that it was uneconomically viable. And then we look at marketing. So it's been marketed over several periods of time as a pub. So we look at the level of marketing, where it's been marketed, and also we would look at the value that it's been marketed at, whether it's considered to be realistic. We've looked at that, and also that's considered to be inconclusive. It doesn't prove that it's not viable. We're kind of following on from previous appeal where it was tested by the inspector, and they looked at the viability and suggested that there wasn't enough evidence provided. There's been more evidence provided since, but I don't think it fully addresses that test. And then let me move on to the camera viability test, which is the second part of the viability, and that looks at essentially ways in which the business could be improved and to make it more viable along the I think it's 12 tests that camera outline, and we looked at that also. We considered in this case that it wasn't conclusive, that it wasn't viable. But in terms of the DM6, it's kind of like either or. So you've got one, is it viable? If you can prove it's not viable, then that alone would be considered acceptable in meeting the test. Otherwise, you'd look at alternative provision. So in terms of alternative provision, we are agreed that there isn't suitable provision in the area. However, we are suggesting that alternative provision is being provided on site with the micropub, and that's what we're deciding today, whether we feel that the micropub would provide that.
And to clarify, the micropub is classified as a public house.
It's a public house, but just on a smaller setup. Yeah.
Okay. It does also say, as the final part of DM6, where development is permitted, any extensions or alterations should not harm the identity or architectural character of the public house. Now, presumably that's a moot point if we approve this, because obviously it's a demolition. That's the proposal. So that's a moot point. It does seem to me there's not been proof and evidence given that the pub is not economically viable, and that is an important aspect of what we're considering here today. I don't think that proof has been met, that it's not economically viable. That's my view. Al's next, and then Serena.
Right, so my next point was, we were told that the pub was being built in order to fund this housing project. How much longer will it take to build up enough profit with a micro pub as opposed to a larger, more traditional pub? Are we expecting delays to the timeline with this new design? That's my question.
In terms of delays with the timeline of providing the micro pub, I think that we'd be looking at something like within 12 months of completion of the residential. So it's something that is conditioned to be provided, and we've also conditioned that it should be marketed as a micropub and be fitted out as that. So in terms of economics, it's going to be provided up front, well not up front, but it will be provided within a period of time. So we don't know how long it's going to take back to obviously be viable. I mean, that's kind of a decision or a challenge for the developers. But essentially, up front, we're looking at sort of a micropub being opened within a reasonable time frame of the residential being completed.
Thank you. Did I have Serena next, or was it someone else? Yeah. Cool.
That's better. I just want to ask a question about the agent of change. So if the micro pub is going to be a new pub, so therefore it won't be, this is a question really, protected by the agent of change, I think, is that right? So what is to stop a new resident, when the micro pub finally gets built, saying, hang on, this is too noisy and I object to the licence and it never gets built at all?
They're just having a look through. So I think that's important. A pause doesn't mean we're not going to get an answer. Or just having a look at what it says. I think that's useful to look back at the actual text. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we've considered this matter, and I think that in terms of any objections, they're likely to be regarding potentially noise. So we've conditioned that noise mitigation measures are provided and adhered to for the lifetime of development in order to protect the amenity of future residents. This is to ensure that the ongoing viability of the proposed micropub will not be prejudiced by the residential accommodation in the vicinity. Also, it should also be covered by, relative legislation in terms of noise and licensing hours.
But that's licensing's a different regime, so there's nothing to say that license would be granted if a new resident, because it's a new pub as well, and the residents will be in place first, won't they? They'll have moved in first. There's nothing to say they won't object and hold out the licence.
Correct. I mean, the licence would be subject to review, but obviously, with relevant measures such as noise protection and opening hours and a proper management plan, I don't see why it wouldn't be considered acceptable. I mean, it's unlikely to be a venue that's playing sort of amplified music. It's a micro pub, so normally they tend to be quieter venues than, say the more traditional pub.
Yeah, sorry to go on about this, but you've got a flat above, or you would have, and those residents will have moved in first. You've got a bar, which is going to be noisy. It may be playing music. It might not be live music. It's still going to be music. I think that's quite risky myself.
I mean, just to add to that, in terms of the condition that's been recommended, which is condition 27, as it appears in the amendment sheet, it is quite a substantial condition that really sort of does seek to protect those future residential occupiers from potential noise. And I think that's probably as far as we can go in terms of the planning control, but of course the licensing would be separate.
Okay, we've got Cartier. Are there any other people that want to ask questions just before I come to Cartier and Zoe? Were there any other questions from any of the committee members? Because this will be the last round, I think, of questions. Okay, we'll go Cartier and then Zoe.
You did say something about to total date you had 27 objections received and 6 letters of support. And then you said, here it says 5, but I thought you said 6, but I could be wrong. Objections have been received since the revision of the scheme to move to a micropub. Yet here in the gallery, we've had 13 people saying statements against the micropub. So something in the figures is not quite right.
Well, going to answer that one, I think that's just because some people submitted comments a long while ago and some people submitted them recently. So you've had some who've submitted them.
Okay, it just sounds like the objections have gone down, and it doesn't, from what the gallery is saying, it doesn't sound like they've gone down. That was my point.
Okay, Zoe.
To carry on from Councillor Serena's point, do you think that a family with small children is going to want to live near a pub? Do you think that they'll object to the licensing for that? Or do you not?
I mean, it's a hard question to answer. I mean, there'll be 6 family dwellings, which are, well, kind of not directly next to the pub. Maybe one of them might be. So they're 3-bed dwellings. And then we've got 2 flats, which one's behind and one's above the pub, which are 2-bed. They may be less, for example, family orientated in terms of the sort of tenure. But we can't say whether someone's going to object or not, but obviously, I would suggest that anyone considering purchasing or moving into a property would be made aware of the future intentions of the pub in the vicinity. So it's unlikely they're not going to know the situation when they're involved in a contract of such.
And I might have missed it. Is there a local letting policy at all? So that it's being relet to people from the Lawrence West, the properties that are being built, are they being relet to, 50% are already in Lawrence Western? I might have missed that.
It's not a major application, therefore it doesn't meet the criteria of affordable housing. So it would be just open market housing, which is it complies with policy because we cannot condition.
So it won't be people who have an existing appreciation for the pub.
It's going to be open market, yeah. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we've asked a lot of questions there, and thank you very much for providing detailed answers there in many cases. Can we move now to the member debate? Has anyone got any comments they'd like to make to start us off? I can do it, but I prefer someone else to start. Maybe we'll go George and then Richard, because George hasn't spoken yet.
So I actually went to the site this morning, and I wanted to raise awareness of the photos on the PowerPoint being outdated, and actually from my own observation there was no security except for a very easily climbable or even just squeeze through fence. So whether or not or why or how that security was removed, and maybe just question why it was removed. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, go ahead. I can well understand the passion excited by this application in Lawrence Western. In many ways, it reminds me of my part of southwest Bristol. In Bishopsworth, for example, we have one community pub which is closed, another which is being presently, as we speak, marketed. I suspect it will go for redevelopment. Another has been temporarily closed for 4 years, but fortunately it's been purchased by the Ring Group, a South Bristol outfit, and it should reopen after refurbishment by Christmas. In neighbouring Fulwood, as Chris Jackson, who used to serve on this committee, will attest, there's not one single pub still open. In neighbouring Hartcliffe and Withywood, I think there are 2 current pubs open. So in many ways, southwest Bristol shares some of the concerns of Lawrence Western. Although I think fundamentally we can't escape from the economic reality of the situation. The pub has been in decline for long before COVID, drink driving laws, heating additional costs, of course, and clearly other uses. One read over the weekend in the press, the present government is thinking of bringing in minimum drink pricing. In my view, if that happened, that would be the kiss of death to the pub trade. So undoubtedly, there are huge pressures. The pub I mentioned in my ward, which is at Fret, I went to recently with 2 other friends. We stayed there for a couple of hours. There were 3 of us, and there were 3 other drinkers, and it closed at 10. And that isn't unusual these days, is it? And I suspect the pressures on the pub trade will just increase, of course. So the issue to me is, does this application, does it pose an improvement? Certainly it's proposing 8 new local homes, and we know how acute the housing pressure is here in Bristol. So that is a positive move, of course. But to me, a key factor is similar to the Rhubarb Tavern in July. The actual drinking, the pub use won't actually cease by this. It will carry on with a micro club. Yes, smaller, more distinct, but frankly more sustainable economically. If this committee took this stand, in my view, it would continue. And you can argue until you're blue in the face whether the applicant should have put a ring of steel around it. But if people want to actually vandalise it and further erode it, they're going to do it. So if that's the case, it will become an increasingly vandalised eyesore locally, which local people will be at the wit's end about. Or alternatively, it can provide 8 meaningful local homes for Lawrence Western people elsewhere, and a local micro pub. In my view, it's a no-brainer. I'll be voting for this application.
Thank you, Richard. Would anyone else like to chip in at this point? Yeah, Ellie, go on.
So just following up to George's point, I went to see it this morning as well, and I completely agree that those photos are painting a much rosier picture than the state of the building at the moment. Half the roof is missing, so the insides are exposed. We don't know how much damage has been done internally. The steel plates that are in this picture on the windows, they are not there anymore. So the building is incredibly vulnerable, and you know, it's apparent that people are in there regularly causing trouble. There's lots of stuff chucked into the site as well as damage inside. I don't think even the sign is on there anymore saying it's up for auction or anything like that. So there's no, it is incredibly vulnerable. Every single window has been smashed. There is glass all over the site. It would be, you know, it'd be really dangerous for anybody to go in, but obviously they are doing that regularly. I think the other point I wanted to make at this point, and I'm very much not decided at this point, is this question of viability and the fact that it hasn't been proven. And there's a lot of discussion about what's viable, what's happening to the sector, what's going to happen. I'm not, and maybe this is because I haven't dived deep enough into the detail, seeing evidence that backs up a lot of those statements. So a lot of statements being made about this isn't the way that it should be going, that a micropub will be better. If the viability hasn't been proven and we are not being given evidence to help us make a judgment with that, I find it very difficult to make that judgment, because it's such a difficult. It's not an obvious one, you know. It's not. There are pubs opening, there are pubs closing. Like, you know, you've got that happening in your ward with a pub opening, and there are other pubs closing. So it's not a clear-cut thing, and that's the bit that I'm really struggling with at the moment.
Okay, I'm not sure you put your hand up first, but go for it. Yeah, whoever wants to go first.
I'm honestly still extremely torn, because on the one hand, I love it having new houses. I want people to have homes. I want the housing backlog to be gone. And a micropub is better than no pub. And I suppose the big worry, like Richard mentioned, is that we will get, you know, this amazing pub. It'll be the giant Goram, and then it won't be profitable, and it will have to close, and we'll be sat here in a couple of years' time. That's all really valid concerns. That is making me very unsure of where I stand on this. But the other side is this pub has been around since 1958. It's 66 years old, and it's the heart of the community. And in Lawrence Western, we don't have any restaurants other than a couple of Chinese. We don't have any pubs. We have a youth centre that opens maybe 2 or 3 times a week in the evenings. We don't have a lot here. Yeah, you can go across to Shirehampton and you've got pubs and stuff, and there's some restaurants around Coombe area, and there might be a few in Avonmouth, but in Lawrence Western, you don't have anything really. And the question is whether or not I want to take a chance on us actually getting a pub that the community deserve, or whether I should go for the safe option of a micro pub and some more houses. And I think that's really the decision that we all have to make today. And I'm just going to have to see how I vote.
I'm getting that sense from other people, yes, in the room. Yeah, okay. Al, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm also quite torn because of the housing and the fact that I think the people deserve a community space where they can take their kids or they can hang out with their mates. And it also helps elderly people be less isolated. But I think I'd be voting this down because of three reasons. So, firstly, I don't think a micropub meets the need of the community. Second, the little evidence has been provided to prove to show that a larger pub would be unviable. And lastly, due to the distance between this pub and then the next one, I just don't think it's fair, unlike handicapped people or elderly people, to actually have to walk that far to get to the next pub. I think that Lawrence Weston deserves an accessible place to socialise and a place to bring the community together. And I think the developers need to work more closely with community groups in order to push forward a plan that works for like everyone and not just them. That's my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've not heard from Sarah yet, so we'll go Sarah and then Serena.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like everyone, this is one that is a real struggle because obviously, we have got this information that the pub has obviously been derelict for a long time and has obviously been allowed to fall in extreme disrepair. But there is a real issue at the moment with pubs and community facilities disappearing. And it's sort of also going into a bit of a question. If we were to vote this down, that would be against officer recommendations. Would that come back to a future meeting?
So the exact process is if we don't go with the recommendation, we move a motion to defer the decision, allowing more time for members to propose grounds for refusal if we need them, and request that officers bring back a report to the next meeting of the committee with detailed advice on these grounds, supporting members to make a final decision.
So if hypothetically we did vote against those proposals today, could we potentially request that there's more information brought to us on the viability of the full pub comparative to the micro pub?
Would you be able to answer that question? Is there a sense in which we could ask for better viability information?
Well, my understanding of the process really is that in terms of the deferral, yes, that should really be to allow officers to come back to a future committee meeting with advice regarding potential reasons for refusal. I mean, from just what I've been hearing, issues regarding viability is clearly a concern. Obviously, sort of the applicant, the agent is here today. Should they wish to, put additional information kind of to us, in the period where we are, kind of preparing that report, we may be able to also provide some, some updates on that. But in terms of the decision process, like I say, my understanding is that a deferral would be for officers to provide the advice on potential reasons for refusal, again, kind of based on the application as it's being considered today.
So I mean, that's kind of my thinking, is that we don't have enough information on the viability of the full pub to really make a decision today. And so my current feeling would be to vote against, to defer the decision, to hopefully have more information to be able to make a better judgment. And just to add, there's been a lot of talk about licensing of a micro pub. And I will say, councillors, if you haven't already, I would suggest sitting on licensing or at least doing the training, because it is a really interesting process. I know it's not material to planning considerations, but it is something that's quite, I think, important to understand when we're sort of discussing these things, and that people can object to licensing applications, but unless they meet the criteria for a licensing to be rejected, it will likely still go through. So there, mitigations such as sound and management plans are likely to be things that will see a license go through regardless of whether there are objections from residents. So I just thought I'd put that little note in there.
Thank you, that's useful. Serena, you had your hand up a minute ago, didn't you? So do you want to say something?
Yes, I also went to the site this morning and was shocked and saddened by the state it was in. It was deteriorated very badly. As colleagues have said, the photos are not accurate at all in the state it's in now. There were gaps in the fencing. Everything was smashed up. It was to consider that is the last pub in that community, and it was also the first pub, and it's in that state, is very sad. I know it's not material consideration, but to me, and this is a conversation for another time perhaps, but there does seem to be a policy gap in that community assets are allowed to deteriorate like this. And my worry is, I suppose, if we did approve it, are we setting a precedent in future for other developers, I'm not saying these ones necessarily, to allow an asset to deteriorate, so then it's in such a bad way that the only option is to redevelop it. That's just a thought. Otherwise, 8 homes, I think, in this situation, then obviously they can't be affordable. There's no local letting policy, as Councillor Zoe was saying, that applies here. They're not going to make a material difference to our housing supply, let's face it, in my view. Otherwise, I can't see that this the viability, as everyone else has said, has been proven for the micro pub, and it does seem this is a bit of a bodge job of an application, if I'm honest. It's slightly disingenuous in my view. I can't see that why a micro pub's going to be viable in this spot if a pub wasn't. What the community is clearly crying out for is decent community facilities, and there are none. There's no community facilities in a pub within walking distance, as set out in policy DM6 and the emerging SSE8 local plan policy. So I don't think it's in accordance with local plan and emerging local plan. It certainly doesn't seem to be in accordance with the neighbourhood plan either. So I have severe reservations about it.
Thank you, Serena. Does anyone else want to add anything to the debate? Yeah, go on, Katja. Yeah.
Just about the viability study, it had been noted before that they didn't use it, that we have a community pub and the pubs get used for different things, not just a food pub. And I wanted to know whether that could be put into it from other community pubs. Again, I have the same feeling. Where you live is not just, although homes are really, really important, but where you live, having facilities for you to go down to the pub, to go meet your friends, to have a cup of coffee, mothers to have their coffee when they drop their kids off at school. I know I've done that. That's really, really important for the community to thrive and be healthy and for people to want to live there. And I'm not sure that taking a large pub like that and then proposing an 18 cover micro pub is... The last month's one was very, very different because that was still keeping a major part of the pub, where this one isn't, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, I've heard everyone speak on this in a debate. I will speak quickly. I share a lot of the reservations. As I've already said, in terms of DM6, I don't think the evidence has been provided that the pub is not a viable concern. And I do think that there is difficulty in proving that, but at the same time, I'm not convinced that the pub is viable. I think I would like to invite another member of the committee to move a motion in accordance with the recommendation. That's what I'm seeking because I'm not going to do it myself.
Chairman, in an effort to be helpful, we have to have the officer recommendation voted on. If that's then lost, presumably another colleague will actually respond.
So
to your
I'm seeking another member of the committee to forward that. Are you putting yourself?
On the basis that we have to vote on the officer recommendation first. If that falls, we can move to your amendment.
Okay, so is there anyone who'd like to second your...
I'm not proposed. We have to vote on the officer recommendation first.
That's not what this says, I don't think. It says that either we move a motion in accordance with the recommendation to test if this is what the committee want to do.
Well,
so I either do that or I seek another member of the committee to do this.
We've always, with respect, voted first on that because if committee isn't minded to support the recommendation, then we could move adjournment or delay.
I don't think that's my interpretation of what this says, I'm afraid, Councillor Eddy. So unless someone is ready to seek, is there anyone is willing to put forward the motion in accordance with the recommendation? Is anyone willing to do that? No?
Sorry, do you mean the original officer recommendation?
Yeah, the officer recommendation.
Could I formally move that?
Sure. So would anyone like to second that? No.
Seconding the vote.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So there's no vote because there's only one person putting it forward. So I will move a motion to defer a decision, allowing more time for members to propose grounds for refusal if needed, which I think we do need, in line with what Councillor Classic was saying around viability. I also think we need to look at the M6 particularly and all aspects to do with that. So I am formally moving that motion to defer and request that the officers bring back a report to the next meeting of the committee with detailed advice on these grounds, and that will support us to make the final decision. So who would like to second that? Sarah. So Councillor Classic seconded that. So we're going to go round and do a roll call for this vote. So I'll go round in turn, and then you'll all sort of say either for that motion or against. So Councillor Eddy.
Against.
Councillor Freeman.
For.
Councillor Calshoni.
For.
Councillor Ralston.
For.
Councillor Classic.
For.
Councillor Almagrabi.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Peat.
Can I abstain?
Absolutely. Councillor Hornchin.
For.
Okay, so that is carried. So we will be seeking this to be deferred and come back for a subsequent decision. Is there any advice you need to give at this point?
I could just comment on, in terms of the viability of the existing pub. I mean, I think that's been exhausted, so there's probably not much more that can be provided to demonstrate on the viability of the existing giant Goram or previous viability. So what we could look at is look at information on how viable the micropub may be. That's something that probably we could explore in more detail. But yeah, that's all I've got to say on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that was a contentious one, and I also appreciate that that is quite a strange, in some sense, conclusion, but I think that is what the committee was coming round to. In previous years, we would have just flat refused it. So I think it's a fair conclusion to say we're deferring this to look at the information and get more information to understand how and whether we can approve this application. Okay. I am minded that this has been a long time. We've had an hour and 35 minutes of the meeting so far. So I think if we could just have a sort of 5-minute comfort break and come back for the second item on the agenda. Thanks, everyone. Right, thank you everyone. Let's resume the meeting. We are going to move on to the next item, but I understand that Councillor Alston, you might want to make a comment about the previous application just before we move on. Is that okay?
Yeah, sorry guys to slow things down. I just was wondering, we were talking about viability as grounds for deferral, and I just wanted to clarify the next step. So the reasons that we're coming back with, or officers coming back with, would include policy, I'm assuming, DM6 and community facilities, so not just the viability but both, and they're coming back with reasons for refusal. Is that correct?
That's what I understand, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is agenda item 9B, application number 22/06070/F85 Ruby Street, Bristol. We do have one public forum statement. I don't think John Rooney is here. I'm sitting in front of an empty public gallery for the web.
He's gone.
I don't think he's here. So he's the one. He would have been the one person who would be here. So we haven't got any public forum. Sorry. Just to note that there is public forum there, of course. And I should state again, I didn't say this before, but the members have been made available. The public forum statements and questions have all been made available to members in advance for them to be able to read them. So let's go straight to the officer report on this. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is an application for a change of use of a residential dwelling to a C4 house of multiple occupation for 3 to 6 people. It should be noted that it currently has a HMO license as of last month and is currently in occupation. And it also includes the erection of a single-storey rear extension and a rear roof dormer as well. So here you can see on the top left here is the front of the house and the forecourt where the bin storage would be. And then you have an aerial view on the bottom right down here. Where that red dot is where the dormer has gone, and the single-storey rear down here. This is the proposed site plan. Here you can see the bins in the front, bikes at the back, and the single-storey rear extension there. Here you have the existing and proposed elevations, which include the dormer and the rear extension. Here we've got the floor plans. It should be noted that the bedroom numbers are annotated incorrectly. There are indeed 5 proposed bedrooms, and this was not initially reflected in the consultation with Transport Development Management. Despite this, it's still considered that there is sufficient space for further refuse containers, which we'll talk about a bit later. Just to talk about HMO space standards for a minute, the addition of the single-storey rear extension would, as you can see, facilitate the addition of a bedroom on the ground floor. This would measure approximately 6.2 metres squared and would thus comply with HMO space standards. There is a general requirement for all the bedrooms to measure at least 6.51 metres squared in a single bedroom, with the smallest bedroom, which is the ground floor one, measuring 9.2. Therefore, all these bedrooms meet single room size standards for HMO development. For a 5-bedroom HMO, there must be a kitchen space in excess of 7 metres squared. The proposed kitchen space should measure approximately 13.7 metres squared and thus would well exceed this. A 5-bedroom HMO must also provide a total communal living space, kitchen and living area included, of at least 18 metres squared. Given that the lounge area would measure approximately 13.4 metres squared, this would bring the total communal space to 27.1. Here we have the proposed attic plan and section illustrating the addition of the dormer, which for a bit of context would be permitted development compliant, so there is some aspect of fallback position there. This would create an extra room, the 5th bedroom in the loft space, measuring 12.3 metres squared. So this application has been referred to committee due to the number of objections. There's 24 objections have now been lodged since this presentation was created, with 2 letters of support. This is on the basis of the increased pressures on parking, loss of privacy from the HMO use, loss of family housing stock, inaccessible cycle storage being sited in the back garden, concerns related to bin storage, noise disturbance, not meeting space standards to do with HMO requirements, pressure on local infrastructure such as GPs, beliefs that the 5 bedrooms would equate to 2 persons in each room, resulting in 10 occupants and not the intended 3 to 6 occupants as stipulated by their HMO licence. Drainage system would be put under pressure, noise during construction, and it ultimately being out of character with the area. So, this is wrong. It should be that there are 5 bedrooms. So, with regards to bin storage, given that there are 5 bedrooms, the waste SPD and policy DM32 stipulates there should be a minimum of 1 set of bins per 3 bedrooms. Given that the number of bedrooms exceeds this, 2 sets of bins should be provided in this case. And for bike storage, probably quite hard to see unless you're looking on your computer. You would have to go through 3 doors internally to be able to access the bike stores to the rear. Due to this, TDM consider that cycles are likely to go unused and therefore should be moved to the front of the dwelling. The proposal would thus be contrary to policy DM23, which states that development that does not meet capacity, design and access will not be permitted. If I could just mention just recent appeal decisions to do with bikes first. There's been a recent appeal decision on Woodbine Road in Easton, which the inspector stated that cycle parking spaces within the rear garden will require occupants to carry their bikes through the building, which may be unhygienic and not accessible. However, given that the front door is only slightly raised above pavement level and the ground floor accommodation will be open plan, it will be relatively straightforward and indeed relatively common within an urban context for such an arrangement to exist. And given such limited space to the front of the property, it wouldn't be possible to site both the bin and the bike storage to the front of the property in this case. It's also considered that the shortfall in bin storage could be made up for with an adequately worded condition, requiring further details for bin storage, and this would have to be provided within the next 3 months. So to do with HMO concentration and sandwiching, policy DM2 and the HMO SPD outline what constitutes a harmful concentration to do with HMOs, which would be in excess of 10%. You can see the property already has a HMO license active, and this is reflected in the local concentration rate of 6.28%. With regards to sandwiching, which is when an existing family dwelling is sandwiched between 2 HMOs, you can see from this pinpoint map in the top right that this would not result in any existing family dwelling being sandwiched between another existing HMO in this case. So ultimately, we will be recommending that this application be granted subject to conditions, in that it would not create a harmful HMO concentration, it wouldn't lead to sandwiching. The bins and the bike storage are acceptable solutions given its sustainable location and the constraints of the site, and in light of recent appeal decisions. We consider it to be a sustainable location with a car-free development where future parking permits would be restricted for residents. It also provides additional shared housing in an area far below the Bristol average in terms of provision for shared housing, and it would provide a 25% reduction in CO2 as stipulated by policy DM14. It should also be noted vis-a-vis conditions, given that the property is already occupied as a HMO, we would be amending all pre-occupation conditions to reflect 3 months from the decision issued. Otherwise, there would be an immediate breach of the position. So that is conditions 3, 4, and 5. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's time for member questions. Any clarifications of this proposal? Anyone got anything they want to ask or clarify? Yeah, go ahead.
What percentage of properties on the street are currently HMOs?
So within a 100-metre radius, it's 6.28%. I can take you back a slide here. If you look down in the bottom left corner, number of HMO properties within 100 metres, 14. You can also see on the top here, if you want to look at the road itself, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. And my next question would be, how would roadside parking be impacted, and could this new HMO be realistically filled with 10 extra people, or is that unrealistic?
So are you alluding to the objection that was saying there may well be 10 people instead of 5? Yeah. So the HMO license, it restricts it to be between 3 and 6 people.
Yeah.
And we're allowing a HMO for 3 to 6 people.
Okay, then sure. That's great. Thank you.
I would just like to add that whilst, yes, that might be what's granted, people fall in love, people get boyfriends and girlfriends and partners, and when you want them to move in with you, you don't always ask your landlord. So...
Yeah, I think that's well documented. Anyone else got a question of clarification?
Go on.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a second. Yep, Ali and then Zoe.
Thanks. Could you just explain... This is partly for the public benefit, but also for mine. Why we are considering making it an HMO, given it's got a licence? What's the difference between having a licence and having planning permission as an HMO? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I think it'd be helpful to clarify that.
So there are essentially two sort of separate sort of regulatory regimes in place. So there's the housing licensing aspect, which is separate to planning. We're dealing, with the material change of use from a dwelling house to a small HMO, which is classed as a C4 use. The housing and the planning legislation aren't interlinked. So here we have a scenario where it sounds like a licence has been granted under the Housing Act, and now we are dealing with an application that is now retrospective under the Planning Act.
Okay, Zoe, go ahead.
I might have missed this. Who is the intended tenants? Is it students, professionals? Not decided?
I mean, you don't really have any control over that in a HMO, I'm afraid. That's a tale as old as time with HMOs. You can't control the intended occupant just as the same as any other house, I'm afraid.
Right, okay.
So how many people lived in the house previous to the application, and has the developer provided proof of previous residency, and are there any complaints attached to that existing HMO residency.
I don't believe that we have information as to who the kind of previous occupants were, but as a C3 dwelling house, it could be occupied by a family.
Okay.
And sorry, what was the second aspect to the question?
Yeah, and the second aspect has been have there been any complaints about the existing HMO so far, and with the increasing of an extra 4 or 5 people changed that?
We aren't aware of any specific noise complaints in relation to the HMO use of this property.
Okay, sure, that's great. Thank you.
Right. Anything else anyone wants to ask at this point? No. Oh, quick one from Serena. Go on.
Sorry, just a couple of things. So page 69, the officer's report talks about the car-free development being proposed. Probably a naive question on my behalf, sorry, but how would that be controlled for? How would you, bring that about, really?
In this instance, what we do is this would be normally car-free, but will also no resident in that HMO will be entitled to any permit that should come in an existing or future parking zone. To be clear, it's very unusual that if you can afford a car, you need to live in an HMO, but there's no actual proper data about that. So we do it as if it's any other type of development. We look on it that way, and our only way of securing the protection of the finite amount of curbside is to put the permit-free condition. And I know members support that, where we try and do it for everything now. So hopefully that will be sufficient in this instance.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it probably is time to move on to member debate. Has anyone got anything they want to say about this application? Richard.
Quickly, historically I have been opposed conversion to HMO where there's demonstrable harm caused to the local community, but clearly the officer confirms that we do not even begin to approach the level where there's an over-concentration. So I'm reasonably happy regarding that. This use would actually meet local need, housing needs, so that's worthwhile supporting. It's difficult regarding the bin storage, I understand that, but that seems to have been properly conditioned. Not ideal, far from, as far as the cycle storage, but we are where we are, and that seems as far as we go. One suggestion I would make, Pips mentioned they are minded to actually refuse any future consent for planning place if we have RP residence parking scheme. Can I suggest we just formalise that by actually adding a condition to that effect, so it's very transparent and clear?
Is that already in there? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's our standard one now. We had some problems in the past. Now we make it. The condition is for existing or future control parking zones.
Can we just let's take that? Is it all right to just have a quick look to see if it's in there, and then you think it is?
It appears in the recommendation. It just starts on the end of page 72 and goes on to page 73, but it's on as an advice note as opposed to a condition, and that is our standard practice. And this follows advice that we've received previously from legal, I believe, in terms of the fact that we aren't actually able to condition it, but it is on the decision notice as an advice note.
Okay, Richard, you seem happy with that. That's fine. Okay, yeah, Katja.
This is the debate section. Yeah. Sorry, I just confirming that. You probably all know my views on HMOs, and some of you probably share them. It feels to me like we've normalised people in there that are single living in multiple occupancy houses. This is not the same as a cooperative housing, by the way, which I don't have any objection to. The space standards in Britain are laughably low. Laughably, if you're not living in them. How you can expect someone to have 6 square meters for their entire lives is unbelievable to me. I mean, I've lived it, so I know what it's like. Fortunately, not that position anymore. I've had single mothers with 1 child looking for 2 rooms in an HMO because that's all they can afford, and we've just absolutely okayed that this is a thing for our housing policy. This is how we solve our housing crisis. And no, they just make the houses more expensive, if you ask me. Unfortunately, I don't know why I'm being asked to do this, because obviously I can't change the HMO status because it's got it already. So my vote, I just have to tell you, will not be about HMOs, because it looks like I don't have a choice on that either. So I don't know why that is. But why are we making HMOs so normal in our society? I don't understand that. It shouldn't be like that. Maybe when you're a student and you hit 22, 23, then you go and get your own place. You've got nurses, teachers living in HMOs. They've got a full salary. They can't afford to live anywhere. I don't understand it. Anyway.
Okay. Zoe, and then Ellie.
To echo Kassia's point, I don't see why a landlord would have a house that has, say, 3 bedrooms and rent it out to a family for £2,000 when you could turn the dining room, the living room, the study all into other bedrooms and get maybe another £4,000 out. But that hurts families. That makes it so families have to start paying more so that they can compete with properties that are becoming HMOs. And so I too will not be voting for this. Again, I know it doesn't really make any difference. It's already HMO. But I think what we need is more housing that is affordable, not to just cut up houses that are existing. We have beautiful ancient architecture in the city. What's the point in cutting it up into small flats so that you will have tenants coming in and out all of the time? Because nobody wants to stay in a HMO. Nobody wants to build a life in a HMO. Nobody wants to have a family in a HMO.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I didn't mean to yell at you personally.
Yeah, thanks. All my fault.
No, not you.
Ellie, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually much trickier than I was expecting it to be in some ways. So Zoe was asking about who would be the sort of intended occupants. Just to give a bit of context, we have got purpose-built student accommodation coming into Bedminster. We haven't got a lot of students currently resident in the ward because it's not near any university. And in fact, the students moving in at the moment have realised that it's a 40-minute journey to get to campus at the moment. Obviously, that will change as Temple Quarter comes on board. But at the moment, it's not a student-heavy area. The other thing I wanted to flag up, which people may or may not want to take into consideration, is that there's the South Bristol Liverpool neighbourhood is being consulted on at the moment. And in terms of RPZs, like people have been campaigning for it massively on that side of the area, because we've got RPZs on the other side of North Street, and that area gets heavily impacted by people who don't have permits or can't find spaces in the permitted area outside of the times. So the Liverpool neighbourhood plans, as I understand it, are on track to sort of come into effect in 2-3 years' time. Obviously not soon enough for this, for the concerns that have been raised amongst the objectors here. But I would say that they've been campaigning for an RPZ for a really long time and couldn't get one under the mayoral system. And then the parking that happens in that spot is some of it's airport parking, some of it's commuters, some of it's multiple car owners. You know, it's a real issue. Even in the RPZ area, it's still an issue. So even worse over that side. A question, sorry, that I should have asked earlier, and apologies. If we, again, hypothetically, as Sarah said earlier, if we refused this, would that mean that the licence would be revoked? Like, what would be the implication? So they would still have the licence but not be able to be an HMO? Like, can you just explain the implications of that?
So I think if it were the case that permission were refused, the applicant would obviously have a right of appeal against that. If that appeal were then dismissed, it would be for the planning authority really to consider planning enforcement action. Again, hypothetically speaking, if that progressed to a stage where it was considered expedient to serve a notice, again, there may potentially be a right of appeal at that stage. Ultimately, if that notice were upheld, then we may be in a scenario where private housing would be in a position where they may consider revoking the licence, but that would be a long way off, and there, like I say, there would be an opportunity to appeal in terms of the planning decisions as well. I mean, just a general comment as well, if I may. I mean, this property is within the Article 4 area. If it weren't for that, then this would be a permitted change of use, so it wouldn't need planning permission. And really the main reason for the introduction of the Article 4 was to control harmful concentrations. And as we've heard, in terms of the tests within the HMO SPD, it does pass those. So I just wanted to make that general comment at this stage.
Okay. Zoe and then Richard.
Very quickly. You say it's not within the harmful levels, but I'm looking directly at the picture. Across the street from it are 2 HMOs, then 1 residential, and then another HMO. What happened to the sandwiching?
I mean...
Sorry, I don't know why I keep looking at you as if you're responsible.
What happened to sandwiching is a separate, is an issue for
I know, but
in the
we
wider
say
area.
It's not harmful, but it could very well be national government that makes these decisions on what is and isn't harmful. But I think that's quite a lot of HMOs to have in a couple of streets. Really? Oh, it's below the regulation, so therefore it's okay.
So the HMO SPD is our own SPD. It's a Bristol City Council document that we've adopted, and it sets out a very specific sort of methodology as to how kind of we will assess HMO proposals. And the document actually includes diagrams, one of which is shown just on the left of this slide, that shows the specific sort of sandwiching scenarios which we want to try to avoid. And having assessed this proposal, we found that it doesn't actually kind of fail on that basis.
Okay. Richard?
As I've said, I've certainly voted against conversions where it has a harmful impact on the local community, and that's undoubtedly the case. I understand very much what people like Catcher and Zoe are saying. The reality is, though, it is us. We have endorsed that policy that Jonathan's mentioned, so it needs to be supported by policy. If it doesn't, if we're talking of refusing something with no policy support, it will likely be overturned at appeal. And we know the previous government certainly told the inspectorate, advise us where you get an appeal where the members voted actually against, and we would be keen to actually penalise the council by awarding costs against them. I don't suspect the new government will be any different, so I make an appeal to you. I agree, we are very limited here, but we have to work within policy.
Okay. Yeah, can I just say one thing and then come to you? Is that right? Because I haven't said anything yet. I do think we're at risk of, what should I say, trying to create our own understanding of what policy is in the meeting, which I know is tempting because we want the best for the residents. I think that the policy framework has been very clearly spelled out that this doesn't, it doesn't create a situation where there are too many HMOs in one area. Now, we can question that, but also I think we do need to listen to some of the concerns around whether there will be ramifications if we refuse this. And so I think I would just say I'll support this because I think even though it's not ideal, I don't think HMOs are absolutely brilliant in every way. It does give people an opportunity to live in Bristol. And that's one of the things that I think is important and is what this kind of thing, unfortunately, we are in a position where our HMO action is not as much as it should be. But that isn't something we can necessarily control here. Al, go on.
Yeah, thanks. So the office mentioned that an acceptable amount of HMOs on one street. On this street, it's 5.5%. 5.5% HMOs. Is that right on this street? I think you mentioned that before.
It's not done on street basis. It's done as a radius of 100 metres within the immediate area when we're calculating harmful concentrations for HMOs. So within the immediate 100-metre radius of the application site, the concentration is 6.28%. And that accounts for the application site itself, given that it has an existing HMO licence.
And so what's the cap? Is the cap 10% or 20%?
Yeah, we consider 10% to be like the tipping point for when that starts to have consequences for amenity, noise, pollution, all of those things.
Sure. So how do you account for the 22 complaint if like everyone thinks it's like fine? How come there's such a large amount of complaints if it's seen as an acceptable level of like HMOs? Like, why would that be, do you think?
So do you mean why there's so many objections, given that
exactly.
the impact seems so minimal?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to speculate, but I would probably say, given that it's in an Article 4 direction and councillors have rightly mentioned that there are other HMOs on the road that have not got a planning history, it then does fall to consider there have been very few opportunities for locals to express their disdain for HMOs within the locality. So you could perhaps construe it as taking one of their first opportunities to express their frustration.
Yeah, sweet. That's great. Thank you.
But also, of course, there's a neighbour notification list. So if they're notified and they hear this is coming in, they may then, I didn't realise that. I'll put in a comment.
Right, yeah.
Which is up to them.
Sure thing. That's great.
I really want to move us on in a second if possible. But yeah, go on, George, if you can. Yeah.
Well, I want to see more places where people can live. HMOs probably aren't the best answer for this. The only reason I can see to deny this application is because of the bike storage, and I don't feel I'm unsure if that's a material consideration or not, but I think I'm probably going to reluctantly go for it.
Thank you. I'm minded to move the motion in accordance with the recommendation, so that's to approve.
I second that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Councillor Eddie seconded that. So should we just take a vote on whether we are in favour or against the officer recommendation to grant this application? So we'll go round again. Richard? Paul?
I'm very reluctant on the basis that we would lose an appeal.
reluctant for the same reasons.
If you could just keep to 4 against, this isn't the moment to talk about the debate.
4.
Yeah, 4.
Against.
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 And I am for. I don't know whether I voted last time. I think I did. I'll have to check that back. Strange, because I'm obviously taking the vote. I don't always remember. Yeah, great. Okay, so that has been granted in line with the officer recommendation. And I think that concludes today's meeting. Oh no, this is where I forget where the next meeting is, but it is at some point soon. Development Control Committee will have another meeting soon, but I haven't got it written down in front of me.
It will.
Thank you everyone for coming, for your patience. 2 hours and 20 minutes, not too bad. Okay, thanks a lot.